This special panel is part of a larger two-day conference co-sponsored by the American Council on Education's Center for Policy Research and Strategy, as well as our own National Center for Institutional Diversity.
The National Center for Institutional Diversity, co-host of today's event, is one example of that legacy. It was established in 2005 following the University of Michigan's defense of admission policies in the landmark Supreme Court cases. I'm honored to note that Chancellor Nancy Cantor, one of today's distinguished panelists, had a major role in shaping our defense in those cases when she was here as our provost. Welcome back to the university, Chancellor Cantor, and welcome to all of our panelists.
We know there's this popular term that the media likes to talk about, self-segregation, right? People say, why are colleges do a lot of work to bring all these diverse students and they don't interact, right? They just sit at different tables in the cafeteria and that's the dominant narrative, right? Well, we know from our research that's based on data sets with hundreds and thousands of students, we know that students of color, in fact, have the highest levels of cross-racial interaction and interracial friendship across the board. We know that students of color have the most diverse friendship groups, and we know that actually friendship group composition shifts, not just based on race, but also on class. And we know that affluent white students, there are many studies that show that they have the least diverse friendship groups when it comes to comparing race, ethnicity, and also social class in combination.
I was reflecting upon understanding how students participate with one another and the evidence that's suggesting, that's demonstrating that their participation across groups can also be evidenced by the things that they do in terms of extracurricular activities. And how can we then apply that to our admissions process, right? How can we then take that evidence and look at the questions that we're asking on our admissions applications and the way that we're asking them and how we're asking students to express themselves and apply that research to that work to allow us to use our credentials differently. Because now we have evidence that shows that certain types of extracurricular activity and commitment and group work has benefits that are translatable to our campus.
I want to take us to another part of this conversation that's deeply important, the law. And all of the work that of presidents and leaders that try to do in this is framed by a set of laws and judicial decisions that are increasingly complex and probably will get more complex. Federal, state issues involved. And I wanted Art to turn to Art to kind of unpack that a little bit for us.
The law has served a very useful purpose. It has been a galvanizing, incentivizing force so that in 2016, the level of conversation and the level of analysis and the level of work on campus around the country is dramatically different than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, where the questions were simplistic and questions of black and white. We're now looking at the robust, authentic question of diversity across the board. And I would posit that but for the force of law, starting with Bakke in 1978, leading to your cases in 2003, and now the Fisher litigation, we might not have had that forceful, galvanizing focus that forced some college leaders to step back and go, maybe I need to spend more attention focused on this set of questions.
And I always say, you have to think about what's in the greater good, and you've got to separate yourself personally from it, because there's two issues here. Yourself, I had to sort of temper my thinking, when I became a president, because I had the institution that I was responsible for, and I had to think about those things. But at the same time, you have to have the courage to move forward, knowing that perhaps you are going to be sued for the right reasons.
I mean, I used to go, when we were doing Grutter, I would go room after room of Michigan alums saying, and they would say, my kid had a better test score than that kid down the block, and that kid got in. And, it just wasn't very compelling to say, well, you know what, we take a lot of kids across the range, and, that 10 points, that 50 points really doesn't predict very much. And all I would have to fall back on was my own story. So I would bring them silent by saying, I was rejected as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. I was rejected as a graduate student at the University of Michigan. And I wasn't hired as an assistant professor. I went to Princeton instead. But now I'm your approver. of test prep.
But at the end of the day, it's about understanding the underlying hard work, including from our conference, the importance of research that can inform the case so that when I go to court representing a university, I can say, Your Honor, here is why the University of X did what it did, and here is the impact, and here is the outcome.